Clarkston didn't have a special services, special education department. They created one and I got the job. And as part of starting into that job, I had to get to know who are the students that are supposed to be served here. And I realized there were a lot of kids from Clarkston that were going out of the district every day. Some were being picked up an hour and 15 minutes before they got to school, and they had to be at school at 7:30 in the morning. Also then, during that time of becoming aware of the Clarkston students, I heard about SCAMP, but it was Bloomfield Hills SCAMP. And they had been operating for about 7 years, and I had kids there. So we were paying for kids to go there, we were transporting kids there, but nobody knew that because the intermediate district handled it. So I went to their SCAMP program, met a guy named Gary Grossnickel who had run it for a long time. They had a lake by their school, and so they had a beautiful setup and it was a good program, but they had a lot of money. So as I spent time there and saw what they were doing, it was a great model. But at the same time, I realized we had a lot of kids in Clarkston that didn't have anything to do in the summer. So I had funding for the first year, and I think we served about 50 kids that first year. It was a high percentage of wheelchair-bound kids and trainable mentally impaired kids. I had a guy on staff, Jim Butzine. I got him to run the actual program in the summer.
Well, my job was to make sure we had the funding I wrote a couple of grants and made sure we had the funding to be able to have the camp. But my actual job then was to hire all the staff and buy the supplies and, coordinate how it was going to work. We didn't get a fundraiser for about probably 6 or 7 years into the program. We were doing all the fundraising ourselves. I remember some of the things we did were collected cans and bottles from the neighborhoods, and on the 4th of July parade we took the Clarkston steak truck down Main Street and collected cans and bottles. We did whatever it took back then to raise money.
My position at SCAMP was actually the executive director of the North Oakland SCAMP Funding Corporation. So my job was to raise the money that it took to put the SCAMP program on every summer. My best friends were Dick and Tony Moskovic, and I knew Drew Moskovic before he was born. For the longest time, I was able to help them by, being a part of their lives, watching him for a night, but pretty soon he got too old. But I knew what SCAMP meant to them. And I had been putting on big events in downtown Detroit. And so I came and volunteered for SCAMP. I said, I'll be happy to help you put on the events that you put on. And so I did that. And then they asked me if I would be a board member. And I did that for a few years. And then Jerry Batt was the executive director at the time. And she said, I want to retire, but I'm only going to retire if you'll take this job. And they did a search, but I was chosen, and I felt chosen.
If you had both a cognitive impairment and a physical impairment, you got a 232-day program. So they didn't need a summer program, but all of the other kids that were in center programs really did. They didn't have a lot to do, and in those days, they weren't very welcomed in their neighborhoods either. The money was there. We could find enough people to get started, and so we ran the first program.
And the first year we had like 42 students. That was it. By the 10th year, when I finished directing it, we had 252 students. And it did that because we used junior high volunteers, we used high school students, and those students would then become advocates for those kids when they went back into school in the fall and in the spring. So we had built-in support systems in the schools from the kids that worked SCAMP, and we had some great kids that worked SCAMP.
My background was I had been around a lot of people with impairments in my growing up life, and I didn't think that these kids should be in the summer with just other kids with impairments. So in those first few years, we allowed the staff to bring their own children, and they didn't have to pay for them to go to SCAMP. And they integrated beautifully, just beautifully. And they went home and they talked about these kids every night, and their parents got excited. And so that sort of started an inroads into the whole community for SCAMP.
When I see the SCAMP buses going still in the summertime, and I see the SCAMP buses going to Independence Oaks or to the bowling alley or even back and forth to the school, I think, oh, I remember those smiles. Oh, I remember, you know, it's been said that SCAMP was a wonderful program for the Scampers. Oh, they love SCAMP. It's an even better program for their families to have, you know, those hours of respite during the day in the summertime is so important to them.
And that's a blessing of SCAMP, is we've been surrounded, and I'm sure they're still surrounded by fantastic community people that support the program. And who would have thunk 50 years ago that it would still be going? And that's great. It's a good thing.
It's truly a magnificent program that I wish every town could have.